Well, this is the spring update, spring 2021, April 13th. And this is the start of our garden for this second year. So these are cold frames, and I have a bunch of starts already in here. So if we start over here, this is hardy cactus that is coming back to life. I'm gonna rechange and rechange its soil for this coming year, as well as this guy over here. Inside here, I have a bunch of sunflowers. So these are just a mix of sunflowers, and actually this is a sunflower that I found out in one of the electrical fields, a sunflower field. So there was one particular head that still had seeds in it, so I collected them, and now they're going to come up. These are going to go to the front yard. It's going to be cool. And then if you see in between here, these particular pots, cups here, where can I see it? Those red little sprouts there, those are elephant heads. So I'm doing an interplanting of sunflowers and elephant head amaranth, just to start building up the soil at the front as well. Mostly I'm not going to be eating these. These are just going to be for ornamental and probably to feed the birds. Over here is more of my winter starts, or summer starts. So you can see I have a zucchini that's coming up, which is really cool. And then just other things. This is kind of experimental, so there's a store-bought mini watermelon and some other things in here, honey nuts, squashes. So that's one of my starts. And you notice here I have it against the house, so south facing, trying to build that thermal mass, and just to more along the lines of starting everything outside, so I don't have to use any indoor energy. I have noticed things are started a little bit slower, but now since the last 2 weeks everything's kind of really picked up. So this is hibiscus that along the sidewalk, someone has planted them. So along the road there, someone on the other side of their fence planted hibiscus, and I collected the seeds, and now they're germinating and they're coming up. So along the front of the house, I'm going to make a small little, think of it as a picket fence, but a hibiscus picket fence. I've noticed that they grow in a tree-like structure habit. So I'm going to train them and exfoliate them to make small little fence, which I think will be kind of cool. So in here, more starts. So those big leaves are cucumbers. They're really doing well out here. Really cool. Those are ground cherries. Over here we have a yellow burgundy heirloom tomato. So those are going to be great. I'm very happy to see they're coming up. I'm going to be able to save those seeds. There's some cherry tomatoes, and then another row of cherry, different type of tomatoes. So I'm very happy to see our tomatoes really thriving out here. I'm really happy doing it out here too, because I won't have to do any hardening off. They're getting full sun exposure, all exposed to the elements. Down here is basil. Basil's really loving it out here. And just more different type of tomatoes, dills, and some herbs. So these herbs, I'm going to just put them in a food forest, just to let them get a little bit more wild and create as a ground cover. For eventually, that's where the trees are going to go. But for now, using them to build the soil. This is our condo planter. So this is kind of cool. I started this actually in the beginning of March. I had them covered up, covered in plastic. I planted out the seeds, and now, let's say a month later, a little bit slower germination, but hopefully we should be able to start eating what's in here at the end of April. So I'll start over here. These little thing guys, they are spring onions, so that's great. There's some lettuces mixed in between here, different types of lettuce. I actually don't know what this is, and it's all over the place. I'm sure I did it. I forget what I planted there. These big, beautiful, big leaves are radishes. So there's different types of radishes. Down in this area, there's a red radish, and then these rows here are white icicle radishes. Really cool. Here is just regular old lettuce, little loose lettuce. You can see we're going to start eating them soon. This is a lettuce that my neighbor gave me, and it's more of a purple, kind of more, I'm going to call it bitter lettuce. So I have a bit more of these seeds. Hopefully I'm going to plant them out, and then I'll be able to save those from that seed as well. So this is cool. I'm very happy. This has worked out quite well. So I'm going to turn this bed over into, it's going to be bitter melon. So next month in May, my dad and myself, we're going to build a trellis that's going to go up this wall, and then it's going to come out over here. So it's going to act like an awning, and it's going to be a mesh concrete wire. So these two sides here will have that awning mesh. And so what that's going to allow us to do is provide shade into our living room. And so on this side, I'm going to do scarlet runner beans, and on this side is going to be the bitter melon. So hopefully they'll come out into here and then cast a nice little shade. I'll be able to pick from it. But the eventual goal is we're going to build a deck here. I'm just going to come up to the level there, and so I'll have a much easier harvest to get them. But eventually this whole thing is going to be good, and then that arbor concept is going to be extended all the way out to pretty much 12 feet from the house, and the whole thing will just be a vining kind of garden, pretty much a vertical garden. I'll talk about over there, but eventually from there I want to have some grapes kind of come up from this side here, and along this fence line here. This is the north fence line. We're going to put some apple trees and create a more espalier type environment, but I'm getting ahead of myself. Along this bed here is more leafy greens. I noticed over here is kind of a very dry because it doesn't get a lot of rain over here. So I have red leaf amaranth. Amaranth works great in drier environments. So that's a smaller microclimate that I found. So I already planted it out with amaranth there. Right now there's peas, there's some lettuces, there's celery, Swiss chard, and just different peas throughout. You can already see already growing is chives, Chinese chives from the original owner. So we've been kind of slowly harvesting. This whole bed last year was filled with chives. So I've really cut them back, mulched them over, and just left a row along the fence line there. So I'll be picking out over there. Notice these barks here. So this is environment that I'm creating for hopefully a black ground beetle. Black ground beetle is its favorite food is slugs. So and there's last year there was a slug problem here. So hopefully I can attract the black ground beetle. I already noticed one down in the food forest in this area. So hopefully he'll get a mate, and then maybe they'll navigate themselves way over here. So create an environment to allow the predators to really shine. This is one of 3 currently that I have of these barrels. I picked them up at a brewery friend of ours. And this particular barrel here is planted out to some green peas in the middle there. And then all along here is different herbs. So this is kind of temporary for now, for this season, but it'll be my herbs, and then eventually I'll pick out some of those plants and transplant some of them indoors for winter herbs, and then keep coming back and forth. All this, I'm not the greatest soil, so I've actually planted out clover, white clover. So that's going to just build up the soil, because eventually this bed is actually going to raise up a little bit more to ground level. So once we kind of get there, I'll just flip over the clover and give all that nitrogen. But for now, it's just clover. Our neighbor here, she's a gardener too, and she does vining beans and other things, so it casts a lot of shade onto here. So that's why right now I'm trying to get those nice greens in this season, in the springtime, and then in the summertime we'll kind of see how it plays out here. We'll go from there. This was an original bed I did last year, and it did okay. Not really. I put tomatoes and everything. Nothing really I never got really good produce from it. So this year I planted out 2 wildflowers. So we'll let the wildflowers kind of go from there and start creating that ecosystem for the rest of the garden. So coming along here, this is a bed that I created last year, and these are hugelkultur beds, so hill culture in German. In between the beds are swales. So one of the things I did for water conservation and a concept from a permaculturist, Brad Lancaster, is plant the water. So all this, I've done a lot of observation and figuring out how I'm going to plant and water everything. So I've taken this downspout and I did a irrigation pipe all along those pavers, and then the pipe goes all the way under the pavers and right now goes out into that particular bed. But in here are different ditches, so the water seeps and runs along here, so everything is on level, so it runs on contour. So those 2 beds have water that seeps in from the bottom, and the logs that I put at the bottom of these beds will soak up that, break down and provide food for the soil organisms over time. But right now they're going to be wicking up that water, and that water will just wick up to the plants. As they go down, the roots will find that water and self-regulate their water themselves. So eventually over time, these systems will just be self-replicating and self-manage themselves. Right now, both beds are kind of planted out to short-term crops. So again, these are icicle radishes, different radishes in there. There's a ring of green peas around the radishes, and then in between is this is Mizuna in here, and then 2 different types of green peas on both sides. So what the goal is, once the really warm summer comes out and I plant out those summer seedlings into these beds, these guys should all be done mostly, especially the radishes will be done. The little greens in between will still kind of be harvesting, but I'll just move them aside and plant the summer crops. So the goal is tomatoes, about 5 tomato plants, and in between the tomato plants is going to be basil. Over there, a couple more tomato plants, and then there'll be the zucchinis will kind of grow up there. So I'll remove these cages. 3 of these cages are going to go down into the food forest, and I'll plant ground cherries, so they'll grow nice and big and have a big area to kind of spread out their roots and get big. One of the new theme I have for this season in my garden is creating soil. So last year building these, the soil was compact, and it took a long time to me to actually dig almost 2 feet down, fill it up with logs, and then bring it back up again to level. These beds eventually I'm going to follow in the style of these 2 other beds, so they're just kind of be in-ground beds instead of kind of with these borders. It just doesn't fit with the aesthetics. But there'll be 2 large beds. These 2 beds I'm going to replicate over here. But for now, what I did here, this particular area, I planted it out with sunflowers, daikon radish, and amaranth. And right now, there's going to be a ground cover of clover. So with the hopes of this year, everything kind of grows. All that sun energy and sugars from all those plants will feed down into the soil and really create a lot of soil activity down below here. Those daikon radishes, I'll pick out a few and eat some of the leaves, but most of them I'm going to leave in ground to decompose over the winter, and that's just going to create nice nutrient soil for then next spring. I'll start creating these beds, and with already good soil already developed. Along the border here, I'm going to continue these beds along here. So right now this is planted out with wildflowers, and then with the goal eventually is in between. So let's just imagine there's a bed here and there's a bed here. There's going to be kind of a center path along here, and in those center paths I'm going to create 4 more of those large beds.
But in the center pass, I'm going to do a berry bush. So blueberry, let's say another type of blueberry, maybe some raspberries, and then something else there. So the goal is when you walk up into the garden, you kind of pick here, you walk to the end of it, and then you can pick those berries and come back. Just creating that diversity in the garden. This is actually a blueberry plant that was gifted to me. It wasn't in the best shape, so I'm very happy I've been able to revitalize it in this hugelkultur pot. So it's interplanted right now with strawberries. There's some peas to bring in that nitrogen, and then just different other kind of leafy greens that they shouldn't get too high and block out the sun. So think of that. All these little guys are the ground cover, and then this is the bush or the tree in this particular little microclimate environment. In here is just strawberries. Eventually I'll probably remove that strawberry because this probably is going to become a path, but I'll take out those strawberries and probably put them along the border there, so there'll be a new ground cover. These two beds here I built them to spec to those cold frames, and I was hoping I would be able to grow greens this past winter, but those cold frames are literally cold frames. They didn't keep any of the heat in, so in the winter times this bed particularly got solarized. I did have a little bit of mulch on it, but mostly it was exposed black soil, and it just got solarized, so nothing really grew here. The things that did grow, so I planted this out last September, and things that did grow just got eaten up by slugs. So the seeds, I guess, that did survive, that didn't germinate, are coming back up again. I planted out a bit more, but this particular bed, I already planted it out to red leaf amaranth, just again because the soil isn't the greatest. The red leaf amaranth really, and amaranth in general, really thrives on not the greatest of soils. So I'm going to use that to revitalize this bed and this soil particularly, because this bed eventually is going to be morphed into one large bed. This one too. So this is planted out into this large garlic. I forget the name. I should have written it down. But these are 11 garlic plants that I'm happy all of them have come up. And then in between here, the borders, I did spring onions as well. So hopefully we harvest those. Once we're done eating those, these spring onions will be up, and then we can pick from them. Again, using that succession gardening, succession planting concept. So I'm very happy to see this garlic come up. I'll save the biggest garlic cloves, and then just keep producing. This is generation 1 garlic. Along here under these kind of leafy spot is asparagus. There are 11 asparagus plants that I planted out last year. Most of them came up. I had some troubles over here. This particular patch didn't come up. So I don't know. I think I might not have planted them deep enough. But over here was quite successful. So over time, this will be asparagus. So I know it might cast a little bit of shadow in here, but that just means over here I can plant out leafy greens. So in the summertime, when the shade comes in here, it'll create a nice cool microclimate because of the shade, and then I'll be able to plant out greens. This pear tree here is pretty awesome. It was already here. It's leaning a little bit, but this particular area, I've planted out to just grass. With the hopes that once it's a nice little grassy area, my family and I, we can come out here and kind of sit and enjoy the shade from the pear tree. With maybe we'll get a little charcoal barbecue, come out here and have a little picnic underneath the pear tree. Will be kind of really nice. Because now we're getting into a bit more of the wild section that I want. I'm going to plant out a lot more herbs to keep some of the pest away. So let's talk about lemon mint and echinacea. I'll probably have echinacea just in pots along here, just so that when we come out here we can rub some of those nice herbs onto our skin to keep the bugs away. And then now we're kind of walking into the food forest. So there's these little swales that I've dug out, and I dug that out and put it onto these beds, these 3 large beds in here. But once the water comes down here, right now I'm pointing the downspout going down into here, and the water wasn't really working. So what I'm going to do is going to change that and going to have the water come down into here and then fill this area up. So over this season, I'm going to level this off. So the water will come up in here and then it will just make its way down into here, and then kind of run off into the streets. But I'm hoping here I'm going to create a small little pond that'll be connected to a bird bath that's going to shoot up into there. So I'll have like a solar pump. So that would be the water reservoir. It will pump the water up into a bird bath that's in the middle. And when it's sun, it will be really cool. So here I already planted it out to different greens. I saw the snow melt over the winter time. Not a whole lot of snow melted in here. It was really the last thing in the whole yard to melt. So that told me it's kind of cool in here. There's a lot of shade. So right now, actually, I planted this out to cool loving crops. So beets, carrots, kales. There's some lettuces along the border here. Is clove, again, white clove. Kind of the theme here is using the clover, using the nitrogen, because there's a lot of carbon right now in the wood chips and all the trees, logs that I buried underneath all this. The clover is going to just feed that nitrogen and help kind of break everything down. These are walking onions, Egyptian walking onions along here, as well as sumac seeds that I planted out. So I still don't know which seeds have come up, if any. There's one particular plant right there. I'm just wondering if that is a sumac seedling, which would be great. That means my seeds were able to survive the winter. Obviously, they need to be cold stratified. But hopefully a few more, if that's a sumac seedling, will come up. I'll let them kind of mature for a year and then I'll just dig them out with the goal of actually planting them out along the fence to create a nice screen from the street. Sumac looks super tropical and I really love the look of it. So this big mound here in the middle is right now planted out to clover, so it'll just be a nice green hill. And then clover, like as I'm start planting things out, I'll just turn the clover into the ground and just provide food to the soil. But this year I'm going to do 3 large ground cherry plants. So 1, 2, 3, and they'll just go nice and big, and there'll be a nice area for them to spread out. We'll get the ground cherries. Those ground cherries will just feed the soil nutrients back into the ground. And then here is some red dogwood clippings that I grabbed, and right now this is all planted out to wildflowers. Here is planted out to daikon radish. There is a blackberry bush that I planted there, with eventually here again becoming very fertile. This gets a lot of sun, so eventually whatever tree gets placed in here is going to be a nice warm loving tree. These are just logs and I'm going to have little projects with, so I'm going to make a bench and probably start cutting these logs in half to create border beds for beds that I'm going to build at the front of the house. This right now is this slopes downwards, and right now I have it planted out to amaranth and clover, with eventually I'll probably kind of I forget the word right now, but here eventually I'll plant it up probably to corn. So this will be really cool. Next season, this will probably be a row of two rows of corn here. This is a grass that leads out into the little meadow of under the pear tree. So it'd be kind of cool when you walk into the house, walk out of the house, you'll walk along the path, you'll see a green path that kind of leads you into the pear area, and it'll be the loungy area. Over here is sunflowers, amaranth, and clover, and daikon. So this will just kind of build up fertility and let the fertility really build up in this area. We'll eventually, because this is north facing, this will just be different types of trees that I'll plant along here and espalier to make a nice little living wall fence. Pretty cool. These are compost bins that I quickly put together. I'm going to be changing these up. So I'm just kind of feeling I'm taking up too much space here for compost. So I'm going to just remove these, break them down, create different fences. So because my compost method is going to be going forward is using these garbage bins with holes in them. I have to make smaller holes. A rat is getting into this particular bin here, but I'm going to make smaller holes. Put a wood kind of border, a box around the bins, and those bins will actually be placed throughout the food forest here. Kind of decentralized in my compost area. It's attached to the ground or contact to the ground, so they should compost a lot quicker. And so this particular area here I can use right now to plant out Build Nutrition, with the probably future goal, if it allows, is to put a chicken coop here. So the chicken coop will be raised a little bit higher. The chicken coop will have a green roof. The chickens will have access to the underside of the chicken coop, so they can run, and I'll probably make the chicken run from here all the way to here. Give them that's a good 12 feet of chicken run in that area. I want to put a mulberry tree here for them, so mulberries we'll pick at it, but then when the mulberries fall down naturally, the chickens will be able to eat it, and I'll think of other kind of berries that they'll be able to get access to. And these two beds, again, I started them at the beginning of March, covered up with plastic, and so I planted them out, and now things are really starting to pop. So there's peas, there's carrots along here, there's daikons, and beets in here too. So both beds kind of mirrored each other, and we'll kind of keep going. I'm noticing there's some slug damage in our daikons here. So I've been making this kind of orange peel insecticide. Apparently works for slugs, so I've been kind of fermenting that inside, and I'm gonna bring that out and spray it and see how that works, see if that gets any better. This is another pot. This is going to be my Scarlet Runner pot that I'm going to move over there, and then just have that as part of the trellis system, and that's where I'm going to put the Scarlet Runners this year, and kind of let that grow up and really cover that nice area in here. And then finally, this is the last north side of the yard. Again, this I planted out. This was under cold frame at the beginning of March, and right now there's daikons, there's tonghole, and there's peas. Again, I can see some damage to the daikon leaves, so I'm going to spray this area too with that orange insecticide. Slug side, hopefully it works, we'll see. And then last fall I bought 2 Haskap plants, and both of them are coming up. So this is an Aurora Haskap or honeyberry, and hopefully we get a couple of fruits this year. So there's that one. This one's called a boreal honeyberry Haskap. So really cool. I'm very excited to see. First time planting a bare root plant, and they both have come up. In between the Haskaps is again more soil building that I'm doing, because eventually I'm going to put trees in this area. Again, I'm using daikons, I'm using amaranth, and white icicle radishes, so they'll germinate and come up. Along here I'm going to plant out for this season is beans, so kind of beans to dry. So I'm going to plant a few plants in here, put down a couple beans, and have them kind of grow up and use the fence line as the bean trellis. And that's it. One last thing here, next week I'm going to start building a rain barrel tower, wheelbarrow, so 3 rain barrels stacked in this area, so I'll be able to take the downspout, divert it into the barrels, and then they'll overflow back down the original downspout. And that's good. This is a temporary shed that I put together last year, so I'll fix that eventually. More barrels And finally at the front of the house is I have right now my compost bin as my water barrel collector. So this is my plan. I'll start it this particular year, but mostly keep it very simple. But here I'm going to plant out, I'm going to put those sunflowers that you saw in those red cups. I'm going to put some sunflowers here, some sunflowers into that mulched area. And then this actual front of the house, I've started to develop, and I'm going to create 2 large, long beds to plant more crops, more storage crops. So potatoes, onions, carrots. Right now these are peonies, which eventually I'll move them out, maybe put them over here in the flower area. But what the goal is, we like to walk a lot, so I did this particular work yesterday, where I'm going to be combining these 2 downspouts into PVC pipe. I still need to finish the connection, but right now the PVC pipe is running underneath the pavers and going to come out into here, and then continue that, build a trench. The trench is going to come out here, make a bend, and I'm going to create a moat around the birch tree. The birch tree grows, likes wet, boggy area. So and I think it doesn't do so well because it doesn't get enough water. This grass here gets very dry in the summertime, so in the summertime it really struggles. So with directing water in here and making a lot more nutrients and creating more environment for the birch tree, it should get more healthy. But I'm going to create a moat around there. I'm going to put that soil onto here and create some beans to kind of run up here. So the moat, once it fills up, right now it's going to overflow out into the street, but eventually I'm going to have it overflow in between the 2 large beds that I have that we'll make. And then along the front here, this is where I'll do a little bit of the hibiscus small living fence, picket fence. We'll see if my neighbor likes that, and then I'll create a more picket fence, maybe on both sides of the street. And over here, I'll mulch this out to create more kind of flowers, a cool environment. So that's the goal over the next few years.